so basically, for those of you guys that aren't familiar with interceptors, basically what they do is when you make an HTTP request to like a backend API, you used to be able to call this interceptor that would intercept that request, and you can add headers to it, you can remove headers from it, and you can basically change that request. And then before it gets sent to the server, and you can also do it when the data is coming back. So you can process that data, change it around before it gets processed to your controller, for further processing. So HTTP interceptors unfortunately did not come with Angular 2. They weren't there with Angular 4, and we finally got them in Angular 4.3. So this talk is titled HTTP Interceptors, there and back again. So without further ado, we'll jump into that. Just a little bit about me. My name is Kukic, and I work as a developer evangelist with Pod0. And at Pod0, we are a identity as a service company. So we handle any apps, authentication, authorization, security, user profile needs, stuff like that. And what I do is I basically write content articles, I speak at events like this, kind of try to get people excited about Pod0, and not just Pod0, but security and authentication as a whole, and kind of getting good best practices implemented. So enough about me. We're here to talk about Angular 4.3, which is the version of Angular that introduced a new HTTP client library, and with that new library, we also got the reintroduction of HTTP interceptors. And we'll see how those look in a little bit. The other big feature that was introduced in 4.3 was router level events. And unfortunately, I haven't had the time to play with these and see how they actually work. So I can't answer too many questions about those. And then of course, the Angular team always does a great job of fixing a bunch of bugs. In this release, they fixed like 20 plus bugs. So those are the big changes in 4.3. The new HTTP client is really the core of that release. And with it, what it brought was JSON as a default response type. So if you guys have worked with Angular 2 or Angular 4.2 and below, you had to do this data transformation when you would make an API call. And most APIs these days, I haven't come across a single one that returns XML data or any other type of data. They're mostly JSON. So the Angular team decided, we'll set JSON as the default response. So you no longer have to do this let response equal data.json to parse it properly. You can just get the data, when you make a HTTP request, and it'll come default as JSON, and you can transform it if you need it. And if you are working with XML or some other type of response type that you need, you can set it now. So JSON default, but you can change it around. And then with the new HTTP client library, they changed the way you import it. They made this upgrade story really efficient and really easy to do. So like in the old way, to use the HTTP module, you would import HTTP module from the Angular HTTP library, and you would just import it like all of your other services. The new way to do it is you just import HTTP client module, and this time it's getting imported from Angular /common/HTTP, and then the import is just the HTTP client module. This is kind of refreshing, and this is one thing I noticed from this is they're moving more and more core Angular services into this common library. So they're treating the HTTP client module now as like a first-class citizen in the Angular framework. So you guys don't have to worry about them changing it like the router a million times. So that's really to use the new HTTP client module, just change or basically just add one word to the HTTP module. And also to use the client in your components, the change is really minuscule as well. So in the old way, you would import HTTP from at Angular HTTP, and then you would just use it in your code. The new way, you import HTTP client, which again, I think this makes a lot more sense. It makes it clear what's going on and what you're importing. So again, you import HTTP client from Angular common HTTP, and then you can use it. Most of the functions and most of the methods are exactly the same, so you don't really have to change too many things around. A new feature that was introduced in the new HTTP client module is typed responses. And this one I'm really excited about. Basically what it allows you to do is when you make an HTTP request, right here, you can basically tell the call what type of data you're expecting back. So in this call right here, I am making a GET request, and I'm expecting to get a to-do object back. And that to-do object is going to have like a name property. So here, I'm saying HTTP GET. I'm expecting to get a to-do. I pass in my API URL, and then that data I can immediately act on. I don't have to assign it to a different, I don't have to assign it to an object of type to-do to be able to get the nice autocomplete or any of those features. So type responses are really cool, especially if you know the data you're getting and you want to be able to work with it right away. And then the other, last big thing that the new library introduced was much better error handling. And basically they introduced this new HTTP error response that you import the same exact way. And now when you subscribe to that observable, to that HTTP request, the first parameter you pass in is your data. You can act on it if everything is good. The next one is the error function, the error callback. And with this, you can append this, or you can give it a type of HTTP error response, and this is going to give you all the information you could ever want about the error. You could get the error name, error status code, whatever else is coming back from your API. So it gives you a much better way to handle errors when making HTTP requests. But enough about the client module. This talk is about interceptors, and this is a really good illustration of how they work. You make a request, you're expecting to get it, but an interceptor will come and steal it from you. So Angular interceptors, as the name implies, intercept incoming and outgoing HTTP requests, and they allow you to modify that request to have it do basically whatever you want it to do. And the most common use case you'll find here is authentications, and specifically token-based authentication. And I'm going to show you actually in a demo how that's going to work. To give you a quick overview of how an Angular interceptor works, is basically an injectable service that implements the HTTP Interceptor Interface. And this interface, all it has is one method called intercept. And this intercept method takes two requests. It takes the original HTTP request that you made, and it takes a next parameter essentially, which is the HTTP handler that's going to pass the interceptor down the line. So you can think of interceptors as basically like Express middleware. If you guys have worked with Node before, and Express specifically, if you implemented middleware, you could have it do one thing, pass it down to the next function, pass it to the next one, and then finally have the final handler take care of it. Interceptors work exactly the same way. You get the request in, you make changes to it, and then you return this next function with the updated request. And it's an observable, and the request that you're getting is immutable, so you can't change it. So the Angular team added this handy clone function, which is basically just going to take your request, clone it, and then you add whatever you want to it. So here, in the example, I'm adding an authorization header of the type bearer and getting the access token to pass it to the API. So this will make sense in just a little bit. So without further ado, we can jump into the demo and see how these guys actually work in practice. Do you guys have any questions so far? No? Everything good? Sweet. So the demo that we're going to be building is actually a really simple to-do list, but we're going to add Pod0 authentication to it. So there's going to be a lot of different moving parts, and I'll show you guys. I kind of stubbed out the application ahead of time just to not waste your time trying to type this code and messing it up and trying to debug it. But basically, for all intents and purposes, this is a basic Angular 2 application that you would get if you were to run like ng-new from the Angular CLI, with just a couple of additional features added. So what I did was, on line 5 here, I imported the new HTTP client module, and then I also added the HTTP interceptors so we could work with them. And then added a couple declarations for our components, added our imports, and then here, again, you see that we're adding the HTTP client module and not the HTTP module. And then finally, I have a provider with an authentication service that I'll go through in a little bit, and our interceptor that I so cleverly named Interceptor Service. And the only thing worth noting here is I added this multi-property and set it to true. And this is what this is going to allow us to do is to have multiple interceptors work at the same time. So, if I were to set it to false, I can only have one interceptor working at a time. Setting it to multi-true, I can have as many interceptors as I want, but I'll probably only need one. My home component is really simple as well. I'm going to check if the user is authenticated, and if they are, I'm going to get a list of to-do items. And if they're not authenticated, I'm going to show them a message saying you're not authenticated, please log in to continue. The authentication service, and this is basically an SDK that Auth0 provides to handle authentication. And I'll just walk you guys through it really quickly. We're using the Auth0 authentication library, and we're just creating a new web authentication, which is going to allow us to handle authentication on Auth0's side, and then we'll send the result of that authentication back to our application. So all the config information is here. We have a login method that's basically going to kick off that authentication event. And when we return from Auth0, once we're successfully authenticated, we're going to look at the callback function, make sure that we got both an ID token and an access token, which is basically going to tell us that we're successfully logged in. Then we're going to set the user session with the access token, the ID token, and an expiration date. And then I just have two other helper methods, one called logout, that's going to log the user out from the front end, and a isAuthenticated method that's going to check to see if the user is still logged in. And the way we're going to check that is see if the expires that date is less than the current date that we have available. Our home component basically just has a couple of methods here that we'll get into in a little bit. And our interceptor service is basically doesn't do anything right now. All we're doing is implementing that intercept method to satisfy the HTTP Interceptor Interface, and then we're just saying next, handle the request and don't do anything to it. So our code is going to work, but the interceptor will fire, but it's not going to do anything to any HTTP request that we make. So that's a quick overview of our application, and you can see it right here. It's running on localhost 4200. I can click login, and I'll do that in a little bit. Before I do that, I just want to show you guys the backend that I built. And the backend I built in Webtask, which is a serverless framework that allows you to build and deploy Node.js-based applications without having to manage servers. And this is a product that we built at Auth0, and we recently opened it up to everybody who's interested in using a serverless framework. And basically what this allows you to do is you simply write your code, write your functions, and here I actually built an entire Express application. But you can add as much or as little functionality as you want, and we'll deploy that right away. Any change you make will be automatically redeployed, and your application will always be up to date. We have a little JSON document store essentially that'll give you 500 kilobytes worth of storage for each web task that you create. And for my to-do example, that's more than enough. So I'm just going to use that as opposed to like using a Mongo or like a Postgres database. That would be way overkill. To walk you guys through the code, this is really simple. Node.js application. We're requiring Express, bringing in this Webtask library that just has a couple of different tools that's going to help us run the Express application. And then this JWT check, this is actually a middleware that's going to ensure that every request we make to our API has the right access token. Basically, we're going to secure this application and make sure that only authenticated users can access it. If they don't have the correct JSON Web Token attached to the HTTP request, we're not going to let them in. We're just going to say, you can't access this application. And I can actually show you guys. I'll just copy this link and try to access it in my browser here. All to do. And I'm going to get no authentication token was found, unauthorized error. So I can't access any of my to-do items because I'm not authenticated. If I were to turn off this middleware here, I'll save it, refresh, and now I have my list of to-do items, which are to learn Angular 4 and to give this talk, and I have done neither. So basically, the simple application I wrote has two endpoints. They're both hitting this to-do URL, and one is a post, which is going to take the data, which is going to take a to-do item and store it in the storage, and then a get call that I just made that's going to basically dump all of the data that's currently in the webtask storage or Mongo storage or whatever database you use. Yes.
Can you use ES6 features here?
Some. You can use some, but we're still updating it to use more ES6 features. We recently opened it up so you can use any NPM module. We used to be really limited to about 500-600 of the most popular NPM modules. We recently allowed you to add any and all NPM modules. So you can just do like, require, whatever module, and it'll work. But we're still working on adding latest ES6 features. And our team is actually really good about upgrading webtasks. We actually had a feature request come in yesterday, and our core developer that works on this implemented it in like 6 hours, pushed it to production, and it was up live. So we're really committed to this product and trying to make it as easy for developers to build applications as possible. So yeah, basically we have these two requests. One's a post, one's a get, and then I'm just kicking off the application here on line 45, running the web task from an Express application and passing in the application. So that's our backend, and our front end is here. I'll click login, and this is going to kick off our Auth0 login page. And here I can log in with Facebook, with Google, username and password, or I can create a new account. And this is all coming from our Auth0 product, where I just showed you that list of properties and keys that I got. I just put them in my application, created the client here, which is called Interceptors, which you can see is named up here. Set our callback URL to localhost 4200, and everything should work. So I'm gonna just log in with Google here. A random one. And now I am logged in. I'm successfully authenticated, and I can tell that because now I'm seeing the logout button and I'm seeing my list of to-do items, but I'm not receiving any to-do items yet because I haven't implemented it in the front end. But I can show you guys here in local storage that I do have a valid access token, a valid ID token, and an expiration date. And if I were to look at any of these tokens and kind of examine them just to see what's in them, I'll throw it into here. This tool, JSON, basically allows you to take any JSON web token that was generated, anywhere, throw it in here, and we're going to tell you what's contained within it. So here, I can see the header of the JSON web token, which basically tells me what type of token it is, the algorithm used, and then the payload data that is contained within that token. So it tells me that I logged in with my account, when it expires, when it was issued, my user ID, and then the connection that was used, Google in this case. And then I can verify the signature here if I have the secret keys, which I don't. But I can at least look at the data contained within. So let's implement our HTTP requests now to make calls to that backend API and pass the JSON web token properly with the interceptors. So go back into my code here, look at this home component, and I have this get to-dos, and I'm just going to uncomment it here, and I'll walk you guys through the code. Did someone have a question? No. So I imported my HTTP client from Angular Common HTTP, registered it here so I could use it, or right here. And then I'm making a GET request to the web task backend, and I'm just going to get that data, set it to this list of to-dos, which I basically set it to any for now, but I'm going to get a list of to-dos and just display them on the page. So I'm going to save this, rebuild the application, and I'm getting a list of to-do items. So I've got to learn Angular 4, and I got to give this talk. But as you guys may recall, I turned off the JWT check middleware, so now this backend API isn't protected, so I can get that list of to-dos. Let's fix that and secure our API again. Should be good. So now when I refresh the page, I'm going to get an error saying that I am unauthorized to access this API, and that error message will be exactly the same. No authorization token was found, so I can't make the request. Then I can look at the error as well, and basically with that HTTP error response model, if I were to implement it, I would get all of this data and I could act on it properly and do my better Angular 4.3 error handling, but I'm not going to do that here. So let's go into our Interceptor service and implement this functionality now. So as you guys recall, I added the access token when I authenticated in local storage. So what I'm going to do is I'll uncomment this guy right here. Recomment, put this guy in play. So in my Interceptor service, what I'm doing is when a request comes in, I'm going to clone it and I'm going to set an authorization header that Webtask is expecting to properly validate my JSON Web Token. And I'm going to set an authorization header. It has to be a bearer token, and I'm just going to get that access token from local storage. So I'm just doing local storage, get item, get the access token, and then I'm going to call the next interceptor or make the request since I don't have any additional interceptors. So I'll save this, and let's see if we can fix this functionality now. Sorry. So now my application works again. I get a list of to-do items, and if I inspect the call, just do XHR, you can see my response data, but I'm curious about the headers here. You can see that this new authorization token was added, of the type bearer, and it has the access token that was generated by auth0. So that's essentially how the interceptor works. And to have it work with creating a to-do item now, I'll go back into my home component, uncomment this piece, which is now making a post request to my Webtask backend API. And what this is going to do is going to allow me to create new to-do items. So once I create a to-do item, click the add new to-do. It's going to make a post request, get that to-do data, pass it to the backend. And then it's going to, if that call is successful, I'm just going to reset that input box. So let me save this, go back into my code, and I'll add a new to-do item. Clear this to show you guys. So I'll put add to-do, and now my new to-do item was added, and you can see it here. This is a post request. Again, without doing anything additional to my HTTP request, since I already have that interceptor going in and out, it's always going to check and add that authorization token to any incoming and outgoing request. Now, what I could do is I could, in my interceptor, here I can inspect this request and see where it's coming or see where it's headed. So if it's going to my API, I may want to add an authorization token. If it's going to like a third-party API, if it's going to, if I'm calling like Giphy or some other API, I may decide that, I don't want to change the request at all and ignore it in that case. So basically with the interceptor, I can evaluate how often I want to, or basically I can evaluate, do I need to make changes to this request, and if not, I'll just let it go through, and if I do want to make any change, if I do want to implement this interceptor, I'll do it here. And then this makes your component code much cleaner because all you're doing is making get and post requests, and basically, as long as your interceptor code is working properly, your requests are going to come and go and work just as well. So that works there, and then just to show you really quickly, guys, I will create another interceptor, and I'll just copy the code here. Do some of my coding, we'll name it something else. So it's 2, and this time I'll add like a different header. Let's say meetup name. We'll save that. go back to my module here and just register the new interceptor. It's called Interceptor Service 2, and I'm just going to have to import it here. Service 2. So if I save this, it should all work again. Let's refresh the application. And now you can see the new authorization header that I added, meetup name, which is a Rocky Mountain Angular. And this works because I did set that multi-property to true. So basically what happened was the first interceptor got called, added the authorization token, then the next interceptor got called, added that additional meetup name or meetup group attribute, and then it called, and then it finally completed that request. So that is essentially how Angular 4.3 and above interceptors work, and how they can make your life a whole lot easier when building Angular applications. That's really all I had for this talk. Did you guys have any questions?
Yeah, so can you also use this to add things like query parameters to the request or modify your body?
You can.
Okay.
You can. So there's a whole set of interceptor. So here in this clone function, you can add parameters, you can set headers, you can set parameters, you can update any of the existing headers. So it has a whole list of, basically you can do anything to the incoming request that you deem appropriate.
So then, some of all the capabilities, are there any gotchas or anything to be aware of, things that you shouldn't do with this?
Things you shouldn't do with this. Let me think on that one for a second. So one thing that I wouldn't, so what you can do is you can add an interceptor to do like a whole bunch of conditional logic to see which API you're making, you're making the call to, and changing the request there. What I would do is if you have multiple different APIs that you're going to be contacting, what I would do is I would create an interceptor for each one, and then just check to see if the request that's coming or going, if it's hitting that API, and if not, then just don't add any additional logic there. Just have it pass into the next interceptor. So basically, just have each interceptor try to do one thing and one thing only, not add too many details into it.
So what sets the order? If you have multiple interceptors, what sets the order that they?
The order is, for right now, the order is set right here. So in the providers, the first one you define gets called first, and then any below it get called afterwards. And this may change, but for right now, this is how they've implemented it. And then this, I've seen this type of notation where they're using objects to provide additional features. And they're doing that for interceptors right now. This also may change in the future, but for right now, it is kind of ugly and makes your app.module look a little weird.
Did you use Auth0 and Angular app before Angular 4.3? And if so, how did you accomplish what you're doing with interceptors?
Sure. So the way that we did it before, and how our quick start still do it because we haven't updated to Angular 4.3, is actually right here. So what you would have to do is, in your component, before making the request, you would have to import the HTTP headers library from Angular/HTTP. And then for every call, you would have to define the headers, add the, right here, append. So you would basically define a new headers object, and then append any authorization or any headers that you needed, and then pass it to the request, which was really ugly and basically forced you to rewrite code a whole bunch of times. In every component, you would have to define this boilerplate, and then if you had to change anything, you had to change it in a bunch of different files.
Is this on GitHub or something somewhere?
It is not at the moment, but I will upload it.
Quan, you can throw the console meetup.
I will.
It's a great example. Thank you.
Awesome. Glad to hear that.
Sure. Sorry, how do you handle, like, if you just want to handle responses from the server? How would you, like, this is attaching stuff to the request showing up.
Right.
You're getting responses coming in.
For the responses coming in, there is a So basically, like, can you give me an example of like what you would want to do?
Yeah, let's say I wanted to catch 404 errors.
Yep. So you can do that here. There is a way to do it. I'm not seeing it here, but you can intercept it here. And actually, even in this next handle, what you could do is you could change this to add a do function. And basically what this is going to do is allow you to basically call that next function that I just had here. Or you can capture the error event there. So if you get like a 404 or 401, you can actually redirect the user to the login page from the interceptor and not have to worry about it in your component. So you can absolutely do that here. I'm just not seeing the, I don't have the example ready to.
So then you could use this as basically like you could build error handling around this anytime I basically do post, get, that way.
Yeah, so you can check in the request here, you can check the method. So you can see if it's like a post or get. And then you can get the error from that if one does come. And you can add all sorts of error handling within here so that you don't have to do it in your component. And your component just, you just handle errors there that are like related to the response to the data that comes in. So you could do all of your error handling as far as the request goes in here. And then in your component, just worry about the data that you're getting back and how to transform it. Yeah, and then when I prepared this talk, this was when 4.3 had just come out, and I know they're on like version 5. Something else. There may be some additional features that I haven't covered here, but the interceptors, if you guys are working with a lot of HTTP calls, and whether it is authentication or anything else that you're trying to do, I would highly recommend using interceptors over the old HTTP library.
Question, is it possible to use Auth0 to reach a third-party API like meetup.com to authenticate through Meetup?
Yeah, absolutely. You can actually, so for this demo, I just had set up Facebook and Google, but if you go into the, or actually it's connections. So with Auth0, you can set up any number of social connections, and I believe Meetup has we have them built in. We don't have it built in, but basically with Auth0, you can add any OAuth 2 compatible provider. So I believe Meetup is. So you would just click on the custom OAuth 2 connection, and basically, just give us the codes, the API keys, and we would handle all of that for you. And you can have as many as you want, as many social connections as you want to. So yeah, I just had Google and Facebook enabled, but all of these come out of the box, and they're super easy to implement. You just click on the little checkbox, and then there's basically you just provide us your client ID, secret, and which data you want, and we'll take care of all the hard work for you.
Now, could you look up a domain, like was an internal company app, like the login by domain? Like,
You can. So if you are using,
we're using Gmail somewhere like for work.
So we have SSO integrations, for example. So if you wanted to enable single sign-on that's domain specific, you could do it that way. We do have our enterprise, which has Google Apps, so you can add Google Apps directly. And then we also have this concept of rules. So this is one of the features that really makes me happy when talking to clients about Auth0. Basically, we built this rules functionality to give the end user as much flexibility to handle to do with authentication whatever they wanted. All we do is we validate the credentials and we send back the response. Now, with rules, you can have as many rules as you want, and with them you can add, we have a bunch of, you're basically just writing a web task, so you're writing Node.js code, but you can check to see if the user registering is on a whitelisted app domain. You can, some of the examples we have here is check when the last password reset was, so force them to reset their password. You can add additional information to their profile. You can do as much or as little as you want with the rules engine.
Where is Auth0 located and what technologies do you guys program?
So we are located, so we have two main HQs, one in Bellevue and one in Buenos Aires, Argentina. But the majority of our workforce is actually distributed and remote. So we have about 250 employees now, and I would say close to 200 of them work remote from home. Like I work from Vegas, so I'm located in Vegas, but a lot of our engineers are basically all over the world. The technologies that we use are Node.js for our backend mostly. We use a mixture of Mongo and Postgres for our databases. The lock widget that you guys saw here is actually built in React. And it's a little, with this lock widget, you can actually implement it in your application. So if you wanted to add authentication, you were okay using this guy, totally fine. But if you wanted to use our API and build your own custom UI, you could do that as well. We have a fully REST compliant API that has all of the features and functionality you see here. So yeah, React we use here. I'm trying to get the team to use more Go, and some of our engineers are really excited about Golang. So we may start implementing it for some features and functionality, but mainly Node right now. And we are hiring, so if you guys are interested. I don't think this will work right now because they didn't add the keys. No, actually it will. So we actually, to get you started really quickly, we have a set of our developer keys. So if you want to try any of the connections that we have by default, you can just turn them on. And if you don't provide us keys, we put our developer ones so you can test and play around with the different authentication options to see what works best for you. And then we also do enterprise, and the new one we rolled out is passwordless authentication. So if you didn't want to deal with passwords, you can either send an SMS or an email with a one-time passcode to authenticate users. And also our database functionality. So if you guys have existing applications and you're interested in using Auth0, we can actually connect to your existing data store and over time migrate your users so they don't have to reset their password. You don't have to change anything. You basically just use our service, and when a user logs in, we'll go to your database, move all of their data over to our database, or you just use this as a pass-through to your existing database. That's another cool feature that I think we provide.